The Story of the Treasure Seekers by E. Nesbit. Chapter 1. The Council of Ways and Means. This is the story of the different ways we looked for treasure, and I think, when you have read it, you will see that we were not lazy about the looking. There are some things I must tell before I begin to tell about the treasure seeking, because I have read books myself, and know how beastly it is when a story begins, "Alas," said Hildegard, with a deep sigh, "we must look our last on this ancestral home." And then someone else says something, and you don't know for pages and pages where the home is, or who Hildegard is, or anything about it. Our ancestral home is in Lewisham Road. It is semi-detached and has a garden, not a large one. We are the Bastables. There are 6 of us besides Father. Our mother is dead, and if you think we don't care because I don't tell you much about it, you only show that you don't understand people at all. Dora is the eldest, then Oswald, and then Dickie. Oswald won the Latin prize in his preparatory school, and Dickie is good at sums. Alice and Noel are twins. They are 10, and Horace Octavius is my youngest brother. It is one of us that tells this story, but I shall not tell you which. Only at the very end perhaps I will. While the story is going on, you may be trying to guess, only I bet you don't. It was Oswald who first thought of looking for treasure. Oswald often thinks of very interesting things, and directly he thought of it, he did not keep it to himself, as some boys would have done, but he told the others, and said, "I'll tell you what, we must go and seek for treasure. It is always what you do to restore the fallen fortune of your house." Dora said it was all very well. She often says that. She was trying to mend a large hole in one of Noel's stockings. He tore it on a nail. When we were trying to play shipwrecked mariners on top of the chicken house that day, H.O. fell off and cut his chin. He has the scar still. Dora is the only one of us who ever tries to mend anything. Alice tries to make things sometimes. Once she knitted a red scarf for Noel because his chest is delicate, but it was much wider at one end than the other, and he wouldn't wear it. So we used it as a pinion, and it did very well because most of our things are black or gray since Mother died, and scarlet was a nice change. Father does not like you to ask for new things. That was one way we had of knowing that the fortune of the ancient house of Bastable were really fallen. Another way was that there was no more pocket money except a penny now and then to the little ones, and people did not come to dinner any more, like they used to, with pretty dresses driving up the cabs, and the carpets got holes in them, and then the legs came off things, and they were not sent to be mended, and we gave up having the gardener except for the front garden, and not that very often. And the silver in the big oak plate chest that is lined with green all went away to the shop to have the dents and scratches taken out, and it never came back. We think Father hadn't enough money to pay the silver man for taking out the dents and scratches. The new spoons and forks were yellowy white, and not so heavy as the old ones, and they never shone after the first day or 2. Father was very ill after Mother died, and while he was ill his business partner went to Spain, and there was never much money afterwards. I don't know why. Then the servants left, and there was only one, a housekeeper. A great deal of your comfort and happiness depends on having a good housekeeper. The last but one was nice. She used to make jolly good currant pudding for us, and let us have the dish on the floor and pretend it was a wild boar we were killing with our forks. But the housekeeper we have now nearly always makes sago pudding, and they are the very watery kind, and you cannot pretend anything with them, not even islands like you do with porridge. Then we left off going to school, and Father said we should go to a good school as soon as he could manage it. He said a holiday would do us all good. We thought he was right, but we wished He had us. He couldn't afford it, for of course we know. Then a great many people used to come to the door with envelopes with no stamps on them, and sometimes they got very angry and said they were calling for the last time before putting it in other hands. I asked Liza what that meant, and she kindly explained to me, and I was so sorry for Father. And once a long blue paper came, and a policeman brought it, and we were so frightened, but Father said it was all right, only when he went up to kiss the girls after they were in bed, they said he had been crying, though I'm sure they're not true, because only cowards and snivellers cry, and my father is the bravest man in the world. So you see, it was time we looked for treasure, and Oswald said so, and Dora said it was all very well, but the others agreed with Oswald. So we held a council. Dora was in the chair, the big dining-room chair that let the fireworks off from the 5th of November, when we had the measles and couldn't do it in the garden. The hole has never been mended, so now we have that chair in the nursery, and I think it was cheap at the blowing up we boys got when the hole was burnt. We must do something, said Alice, because our cash is empty. She rattled the money box as she spoke, and it really did rattle because we only keep bad sixpences in it for luck. Yes, but what shall we do? Said Dickie. It's so jolly easy to say, let's do something. Dickie always wants everything settled exactly. Father calls him the definite article. Let's read all the books again. We shall get lots of ideas out of them. It was Noel who suggested this, but we made him shut up because we know well enough he only wanted to get back to his old books. Noel is a poet. He sold some of his poetry once, and it was printed, but that does not come in this part of the story. Then Dickie said, Look here, we'll be quite quiet for 10 minutes by the clock, each think of some way to find treasure, and then we've thought, we'll try all the ways, one after the other, beginning with the eldest. I shan't be able to think in 10 minutes. Make it half an hour, said H.O. His real name is Horace Octavius, but we call him H.O. because of the advertisement. And it's not so very long ago he was afraid to pass the billboard where it says, Eat H.O. in big letters. He says it was when he was a little boy, but I remember last Christmas but one. He woke in the middle of the night crying and howling, and they said it was the pudding, but he told me afterwards he had been dreaming that they really had come to eat H.O., and it couldn't have been the pudding, when you come to think of it, because it was very plain. Well, we made it half an hour, and we all sat quiet and thought and thought. I made up my mind before 2 minutes were over, and I saw the others had. All but Dora, who is always an awful time over everything, and got pins and needles in my leg for sitting still so long. And when it was 7 minutes, H.O. cried out, Oh, it must be more than half an hour. H.O. is 8 years old, but he cannot tell the clock yet. Oswald would tell the clock when he was 6. We all scratched ourselves and began to speak at once, but Dora put up her hands to her ears and said, One at a time, please. We aren't playing Babel. It is a very good game. Did you ever play it? So Dora made us all sit in a row on the floor in ages, and then she pointed at us with finger, and then had the brass thimble that had the brass thimble on it. Her silver one got lost when the last housekeeper but 2 went away. We think she must have forgotten it was Dora's and put it in her box by mistake. She was a very forgetful girl. She used to forget what she had spent money on, so that the change was never quite right coming back. Oswald spoke first. I think we might stop people on Blackheath with crape masks and horse pistols and say, Your money or your life. Resistance is useless. We are armed to the teeth, like Dick Tarpon and Claude Duval. It wouldn't matter about not having horses because coaches have gone out too. Dora screwed up her nose the way she always does when she is going to talk like the good elder sister in books, and said, "That would be very wrong. It's like pickpocketing or taking pennies out of father's great coat when it's hanging in the hall. I must say, I don't think she need have said that, especially before the little ones, for it was when I was only 4 after all." But Oswald was not going to let her see he cared, so he said, "Oh, very well. I can't think of lots of other things. We could rescue an old gentleman from deadly highwaymen." "There aren't any," said Dora. "Oh, well, it's all the same. From deadly peril, then. There's plenty of that. Then he would turn out to be the Prince of Wales, and he would say, 'My noble, my cherished preserver, here is £1,000,000 a year. Rise up, Sir Oswald Bastable.'" But the others did not seem to think so. It was Alice's turn to say. She said, "I think we might try the divining rod. I'm sure I could do it. I've seen and read about it. You hold a stick in your hand, and when you come to where you think is gold underneath, the stick kicks about, so you know, and you dig." "Oh," said Dora suddenly, "I have an idea, but I'll say last. I hope the divining rod isn't wrong. I believe it's wrong in the Bible." "So is eating pork and duck," said Dickie. "You can't go by that." "Anyhow, we'll try the other way first," said Dora. "Now, H.O., let's be bandits. And H.O., I dare say it's wrong, but it would be fun pretending." "I'm sure it's wrong," said Dora. And Dickie said she thought everything was wrong. She said she didn't, and Dickie was very disagreeable, so Oswald had to make peace. And he said, "Dora needn't play if she doesn't want to. Nobody asked her. And Dickie, don't be an idiot. Do dry up, and let's hear what Noel's idea is." Dora and Dickie did not look pleased, but I kicked Noel under the table to make him hurry up, and then he said he didn't think he wanted to play any more. That's the worst of it. The others are so jolly ready to quarrel. I told Noel to be a man, and not snivel like a pig. And at last he said he had not made up his mind whether he would print his poetry in a book or sell it, and find a princess to marry her. "Whichever it is," he added, "none of you shall want for anything, though Oswald did kick me, and say I was a snivelling pig." "I didn't," said Oswald. "I told you not to be." And Alice explained to him that that was quite the opposite of what he thought. So he agreed to drop it. Then Dickie spoke. "You must all of you have noticed the advertisement in the papers, telling you that ladies and gentlemen can easily earn £2 a week with their spare time, and to send 2 shillings, for example, and instructions, carefully packed, free from the observation. Now that we don't go to school, and all our time is spare time, so I should think we could easily earn £20 a week each. Then that would do us very well. We'll try some of the other things first, and directly we have any money, we'll send for the sample and instructions. And I have another idea, but I must think about it before I say." We all said, "Out with it. What's the other idea?" But Dickie said, "No, that is Dickie all over. He never will show you anything he's making till it's quite finished, and the same with the inmost thoughts. But he is pleased if you seem to want to know." So Oswald said, "Keep your silly old secret, then. Now, Dora, drive ahead. We've all said except you." Then Dora jumped up and dropped the stocking and the thimble. It rolled away, and we did not find it for days, and said, "Let's try my way now. Besides, I'm the eldest, so it's only fair. Let's dig for treasure. Not any tiresome diving rod, but just plain digging. People who dig for treasure always find it, And then we shall be rich, and we needn't try your ways at all. Some of them are rather difficult, and I'm certain some of them are wrong. And we must always remember that wrong things, but we told her to shut up and come on, and she did. I couldn't help wondering, as we went to the garden, why Father had never thought of digging there for treasure instead of going to his beastly office every day. Chapter 2. Digging for Treasure. I'm afraid the last chapter was rather dull. It's always dull in books when people talk, and don't do anything. But I was obliged to put it in, or else you wouldn't have understood all the rest. The best part of books is when things are happening. That is the best part of real things, too. This is why I shall not tell you in this story about all the days when nothing happened. You will not catch me saying, "Thus the sad day passed slowly by," or "the years rolled on their weary course," or "time went on," because it's silly. Of course time goes on, whether you say it or not. So I shall just tell you the nice, interesting parts. And in between you will understand that we had our meals and got up and went to bed and dull things like that. It would be sickening to write all that down, though of course it happened. I said so to Albert next door's uncle, who writes books, and he said, "Quite right. That's what we call selection, a necessity of true art." And he is very clever indeed. So you see, I have often thought that if people who write books for children knew a little more, it would be better. I shall not tell you anything about us except that I should like to know about it if I was reading the story and you were writing it. Albert's uncle says I ought to have put this in the preface. I never read prefaces, and it is not much good writing things just for people to skip. I wonder other authors have never thought of this. Well, when we have agreed to dig for treasure, we all went down into the cellar and lit the gas. Oswald would have liked to dig there, but it is stone flags. We looked among the old boxes and broken chairs and fenders and empty bottles and things, and at last we found the spades we had to dig in the sand with when we went to the seaside 3 years ago. They are silly, babyish wooden spades that split if you look at them, but good iron with blue mark across the top of the iron part, the yellow wooden handles. We wasted a little time getting them dusted because the girls wouldn't dig with spades that had cobwebs on them. Girls would never do for Africa explorers or anything like that. They are too beastly particular. It was no use doing the thing by halves. We marked out a sort of square in the mouldy part of the garden, about 3 yards across, and began to dig, but we found nothing except worms and stones, and the ground was very hard. So we thought we would try another part of the garden, and we found a place in the big, round flower bed where the ground was much softer. We thought we'd make a smaller hole to begin with, and it was much better. We dug and dug and dug, and it was jolly hard work. We got very hot digging, but we found nothing. Presently Albert next door looked over the wall. We do not like him very much, but we let him play with us sometimes because his father is dead, and you must not be unkind to orphans, even if their mothers are alive. Albert is always very tidy. He wears frilly collars and velvet knickerbockers. I can't think how he can bear to. So we said, "Hello," and he said, "What you up to?" "We're digging for treasure," said Alice. "An ancient parchment revealed to us that the place of concealment is. Come over and help us. When we have dug up enough, we shall find a great pot of red clay, full of gold and precious jewels." Albert next door only sniggered and said, "What silly nonsense. He cannot play properly at all." This is very strange, because he is a very nice uncle. You see, Albert next door doesn't care for reading. He has not read nearly so many books as we have, so he is very foolish and ignorant, but he cannot be helped, and you just have to put up with it, and when you want him to do anything. Besides, it's wrong to be angry with people for not being so clever as you are yourself. It is not always their fault. So Oswald said, "Come and dig, and they shall share the treasure when we've found it." But he said, "I shan't. I don't like digging, and I'm going in to have my tea." "Come along and dig, there's a good boy," said Alice. "You can use my spade. It's much the best." So he came along and dug. When once he was over the wall, we kept him at it, and we worked as well, of course, and the hole got big. Pincer worked too. He is our dog, and he is very good at digging. He digs for rats in the dustbin sometimes and gets very dirty, but we love our dog, even though his face wants washing. "I expect we shall have to make a tunnel," said Oswald, "to reach the very treasure." So he jumped into the hole and began to dig at one side. After that, we took in turns digging a big tunnel, and Pincer was much useful in scraping earth out of the tunnel. He does it with his back feet when you say rats, and he digs with his front ones and burrows with his nose as well. At last the tunnel was nearly a yard long, and big enough to creep along to find the treasure, if only it had been a bit longer. Now it was Albert's turn to dig, but he funked it. "Take your turn like a man," said Oswald. Nobody can say that Oswald doesn't take his turn like a man, but Albert wouldn't. So we had to make him, because it was only fair. "It's quite easy," said Alice. "You just crawl in and dig with your hands. Then when you come out, you can scrape out what you've done with the spade. Come, be a man. You won't notice it being dark in the tunnel if you shut your eyes tight. We've all been in except Dora, and she doesn't like worms." "I don't like worms either," said Albert next door. But we remembered how he had picked a fat red black worm up in his fingers and thrown it at Dora only the day before. So we put him in. But he would not go in head first, the proper way, and dig with his hands, as we thought he should do, though Oswald was very angry at the time, for he hates snivellers. Yet afterwards he owned that perhaps it was just as well. You should never be afraid to own that perhaps you were mistaken, but it is cowardly to do it unless you are quite sure you are in the wrong. "Let me go in feet first," said Albert next door. "I'll dig with my boots. I will truly honor bright." So we let him go in feet first, and we did it very slowly, and at last he was in, and only his head sticking out into the hole, all the rest of him in the tunnel. "Now dig with your boots," said Oswald, "and Alice, do catch hold of the pincer. He'll be digging again in another minute, and perhaps it would be uncomfortable for Albert if Pincer threw the mold in his face." We should always try to think of things like this. Thinking of other people's comfort makes them like you. Alice held Pincer. "Kick! Dig with your feet, for all you're worth." So Albert next door began to dig with his feet. We stood on the ground over him, waiting. And all in a minute the ground gave way, and we tumbled together in a heap. And when we got up, there was a little shallow hollow where he had been standing, and Albert next door was underneath, stuck quite fast, because the roof of the tunnel had tumbled on him. He is a horrible, unlucky boy to have anything to do with. It was dreadful the way he cried and screamed, though we had to own it didn't hurt, only it was rather heavy, and he couldn't move his legs. We would have to dig him out all right. in time, but he screamed so. We were afraid the police would come, so Dickie climbed over the wall to tell the cook there to tell Albert next door's uncle he had been buried by mistake, and to come and help dig him out. Dickie was a long time gone. We wondered what had become of him, and all the while the screaming went on, for we had taken the loose earth of Albert's face so that he could scream quite easily and comfortably. Presently Dickie came back, and Albert next door's uncle came with him. He was very long-legged, and his hair is light, and his face is brown. He has been to sea, but now he writes books. I like him. He told his nephew to stow it, so Albert did, and then he asked him if he was hurt, and Albert had to say he wasn't, for though he is a coward and very unlucky, he is not a liar like some boys are. This promises to be a protracted, if agreeable task, said Albert next door's uncle, rubbing his hands and looking at the hole with Albert's head in it. I will get another spade. So he fetched the big spade out of the next-door garden tool shed and began to dig his nephew out. Mind you keep very still, he said, or I might chunk a bit out of you with the spade. Then after a while he said, I confess, I am not absolutely insensible to the dramatic interest of the situation. My curiosity is excited. I own that I should like to know how my nephew happened to be buried. But don't tell me if you'd rather not. I suppose no force was used. Only moral force, said Alice. They used to talk a lot about moral force at the school where she went. And in case you don't know what it means, I'll tell you what it's making people do what they don't want to just by slinging them, or laughing at them, or promising them things if they do good. Only moral force, eh? Said Albert next door's uncle. Well, Doris said, I'm very sorry it happened to Albert. I'd rather it had been one of us. It would have been my turn to go into the tunnel, only I don't like worms, so they let me off. You see, we were digging for treasure. Yes, said Alice. I think we were just coming to the underground passage that leads to the secret hoard when the tunnel fell in on Albert. He is so unlucky. And she sighed. Then Albert next door began to scream again, and his uncle wiped his own face, not Albert's, with his silk handkerchief, and then he put it in his trouser pocket. It seems a strange place to put a handkerchief, but he had his coat and waistcoat off, and I suppose he wanted the handkerchief to be handy. Digging is warm work. He told Albert next door to drop it, or he would proceed further in the matter, so Albert stopped screaming, and presently his uncle finished digging him out. Albert did look so funny with his hair all dusty, and his velvety suit covered with mold, and his face muddy with earth and crying. We all said how sorry we were, but he wouldn't say a word back to us. He was most awfully sick to think he'd been the one buried, when it might just as well have been one of us. I felt myself that it was very hard. So you were digging for treasure, said Albert next door's uncle, wiping his face again with his handkerchief. Well, I fear that your chances of success are small. I have made a careful study of the whole subject. What I don't know about buried treasure is not worth knowing, and I never knew more than one coin buried in any one garden, and that is generally, Ho, what's this? He pointed to something shining in the hole he had just dragged Albert out of. Oswald picked it up. It was half a crown. We looked at each other, speechless with surprise and delight, like in books. Well, that's lucky, at all events, said Albert next door's uncle. Let's see. That's 5 pence each for you. It's 4 pence something. I can't do fractions, said Dickie. There are 7 of us, you see. Oh, you count Albert as one of yourselves on the occasion, eh? "Of course," said Alice. "I say, he was buried after all." "Why shouldn't we let him have the odd something, and we'll have the 4 pence each?" We all agreed to do this, and told Albert next door we would bring his share as soon as we could get the half-crown changed. He cheered up a little at that. His uncle wiped his face again. He did look hot, and began to put his coat and waistcoat on. When he had done it, he stooped and picked up something. He held it up, and you will hardly believe it, but it is quite true. It was another half-crown. To think that there should be two! In all my experience of buried treasures, I never heard of such a thing. I wish Albert next door's uncle would come treasure-seeking with us regularly. He must have very sharp eyes, for Dora says she was looking just the minute before at that very place where the second half-crown was picked up from, and she never saw it.